After Rayman 2 received its 5th port in 2001, arriving on the Sony PlayStation 2, and the limbless mascot had enjoyed a multiplayer spin-off, people began to ask when we would see a sequel to what was still being hailed at the time as one of the greatest 3D platformers of all time. UB Pictures, as the studio was still known, was keen to follow their success with a full sequel. However, Michel Ancel had diverted his attention to a new passion project, using the power of the new generation of hardware to tell a more ambitious, narrative-driven story. Rayman was Ubisoft's first successful mascot, however, and the dry wit of the series had captured audience imaginations. So, a new team within the studio was assembled to pitch the follow-up. And though they ran ideas past Rayman's creator, he kept himself firmly distant from this new production. The change in tone is obvious almost from the moment Rayman 3 begins. Whereas the conceptual idea for the Rayman universe is one of absurdist fantasy, the last two games had played the actual narrative fairly straight. When space pirate robots with eye patches and wooden legs blow up the heart of the world, agitating a space of vengeful zombie chickens, the game's response is to point you towards the enemy and shout, "Go!" However, Rayman 3 nods and winks with you along this entire time, with Hollywood-grade voice actors brought on to provide non-stop commentary. Billy West's voice is charming enough as Murphy, the cheeky guide who eases you into the adventure. There's great fun to be had here in small doses, however mileage is going to vary depending on your taste in severely dated pop culture references. Of less immediate charm is the transformation Glowbox has undergone. From comically goofy but loving husband and father to brainless man-child unable to concentrate for more than a few moments or think about anything directly outside of his line of sight. Unlike Murphy, Glowbox is a character who definitely risks outstaying his welcome as the entire game revolves around transporting him from one location to another location. Fortunately, this is not a bodyguard mission. You're not required to protect him from enemies, he'll simply run and hide when they arrive. But it does make his obtrusive presence unavoidable, both vocally and within the gameplay mechanics. Whether you're listening to him criticise your performance, or using his belched bubbles to climb to unreachable platforms, Glowbox dominates this game, and people's tolerance for the blue lump will be a significant decider in their appreciation of it. It's not that I decry the interaction of voice acting, but Michel Ancel was spot on when he somewhat diplomatically described the game as being very concrete in its humour. The sense of personal discovery and wonder has been stripped out of the game and replaced with a very full, very self-aware and very erratic new status quo. It's constantly working to up the ante, switching up gameplay styles, mission structures and its own self-referential humour just to try and keep you engaged. I could admire a game so determined to outdo itself, but at some point it just becomes a little tiring. Even when it breaks the pace to give a breather, it does so in an extravagant, "This is boring" detour where the plot stops so you can take the longest possible shortcut from A to B. It didn't need to be boring. All of the core, excellent gameplay mechanics of Rayman 2 have been ported over and in many parts upgraded. There are ways to make puzzle solving sections interesting, besides hanging a lampshade on them and marvelling at the cynicism of the whole thing. The biggest change is combat. Whereas Rayman 2 was largely a 1-on-1, 2 or 3 at the most combatants per arena affair, Hoodlum Havoc is not afraid of throwing wave after wave of enemies at you. There are several types of Hoodlum and each require distinct strategies to get through. The enemy designs are good, but I do wish there were a few more of them by the end, as there are only so many variations on Hooded Scarecrow Gang available. The game's self-aware cynicism about this clearly recognised this problem, which is why it introduced the Knaran, an invincible, stalking, cave-dwelling race who cannot be fought, just avoided. This is a great moment of stealth in the middle of the game, but the moment you leave the Knaran lair and return to fighting the hoodlums, the game begins to readily acknowledge that it's out of new tricks and now just begins repeating itself as it builds towards some kind of conclusion. Having a narrative means that there is time to build Reflux, the Knaran champion, and Andre, the Black Lung master of the hoodlums, as interesting villains, but instead One is just a boring monster and the other purely comic relief, all mouth with no bite. To meet his new adversaries, Rayman has boosted his arsenal as well, and can get time-restricted upgrades that give him stronger punches, hurricane-induced status effects, an electrifying grab, or even the ability to launch missiles. The constant switching up between the traditional lock-on, strafe and shoot approach and the other tactics keeps the game engaging, and it is fun to work through. The team also added a score mode, designed to encourage players to chain together actions to rack up as many points as possible. There is certainly no shortage of things to do in Rayman 3, and most of it, in individual aspects, have been taken apart, rebuilt and improved from the predecessor. It's in the way that it's all slotted back together that it feels a little less impressive. Whereas the first game was a standout release for its time, the more powerful hardware rarely feels taxed by what the hoodlums have to throw at them. The game is pretty, with plenty of attention to make the environments as lush and vibrant as possible. In fact, it's so overstuffed with content that it can at times be a little difficult to focus on the characters. A similar philosophy has been applied to the game design. There are stealth sections, racing sections, vehicle sections, fighting sections, platforming sections, but the cohesive thread tying them all together is just a little weaker than in the prior game. For people who enjoy a 3D platformer that has more to offer than just being a collectathon, or who finished Rayman 2 and found themselves wanting more, I can heartily recommend this as a worthy sequel. But for me, I cannot say it ever manages to overshadow what came before.